You know that moment at a party where everyone seems to be mid-laugh, mid-sentence, mid-belonging, and you're standing just slightly outside the circle, holding your drink, nodding at the right moments, but feeling like you're watching the whole thing through glass? Like everyone else got a manual you never received? That feeling. That specific, quiet, persistent feeling. That's what we're talking about today. And if you felt it your whole life, not just occasionally, not just in new situations, but consistently across different schools, different jobs, different friend groups, then this isn't about shyness. This isn't about being awkward. There is something specific happening in your psychology, and it has a name, a history, and frankly, a strange kind of gift buried inside it. Let's start with the brain. Humans are wired for belonging, not as a preference, as a survival mechanism. For hundreds of thousands of years, being excluded from the group meant death. No tribe, no food, no protection. So your brain evolved to monitor social belonging the way it monitors physical pain. There's actually a system for this. Psychologists call it the sociometer, an internal gauge that constantly measures how accepted or rejected you are by the people around you. For most people, this system hums quietly in the background. But for people who have always felt like outsiders, research suggests the sociometer is calibrated differently. It's more sensitive. It picks up signals others miss. A slight change in someone's tone, a conversation that stops when you walk in, an invitation that never came. Your brain registered all of it, filed all of it, and slowly began building a picture. You are different from them, and the brain doesn't just note that picture, it protects it. Because once your mind has organized the world around a particular story, especially one that formed early enough, it starts filtering reality to keep that story intact. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, but when it's tied to identity and belonging, it goes deeper than a cognitive quirk. It becomes the architecture of how you move through rooms, conversations, relationships. You don't just notice rejection, you anticipate it. And that anticipation quietly changes how you show up before anything has even happened. Here's where it gets important. That picture didn't start at the party. It started much earlier. For most chronic outsiders, the pattern was encoded in childhood. Maybe you were the kid who didn't understand why the group laughed at something that seemed cruel. Maybe your interests didn't match anyone around you. Maybe your family itself felt like a group you were slightly outside of, present at the table, but never quite translated. Developmental psychologists call this a disruption in early social mirroring. When your inner world consistently doesn't match the world being reflected back at you, your brain makes a quiet executive decision. I don't quite fit here. And once that belief is encoded early enough, it becomes a lens. You don't just experience outsider moments, you expect them. You start reading rooms for evidence that confirms what you already believe about yourself. Psychologists call this rejection sensitivity, so a heightened state of alertness to any signal that exclusion is coming. And here's the cruel part. It becomes self-fulfilling. You hold back slightly because you're bracing. You don't quite let people in because part of you is already preparing for the moment. They realize you're too much, or not enough, or simply different. And that guarded version of you, the one protecting itself, is often misread by others as cold or distant or hard to know, so they don't pursue. And your brain says, "See, I told you." What makes this loop so difficult to break is that it feels like evidence, not habit. Every time someone drifts away, every time you're left out, every time a conversation ends just slightly too soon, it doesn't feel like a pattern your nervous system created. It feels like proof of something true about you. And that's the most important thing to understand about rejection sensitivity. And it doesn't feel like fear. It feels like clarity. But here's what nobody tells you. The same neurological sensitivity that made you feel like an outsider is also responsible for something remarkable. People who have always existed slightly outside the group develop a quality of observation that is genuinely rare. You became a student of human behavior out of necessity. While everyone else was inside the experience, you were watching it. Noticing patterns, reading subtext, understanding group dynamics from the outside in ways that people embedded in the group never could. Research in social psychology consistently finds that individuals with high rejection sensitivity show heightened accuracy in reading social cues and emotional states in others. You became perceptive because your social survival, depended on it. There's something else. Outsiders, by definition, are less shaped by the group. They didn't absorb the consensus opinions, the default values, the unspoken rules of whatever circle they grew up around. And while that felt like a loss, and it was genuinely, it also means your thinking is more independently formed than you probably realize. Your perspective wasn't manufactured by belonging, it came from somewhere quieter and more original. That's not nothing. In a world where most people's opinions are just the averaged opinions of whoever they spent the most time with, someone whose worldview was built in solitude carries something genuinely distinct. But here's the shadow side that's worth sitting with. Some people who have always felt like outsiders eventually stop trying to belong entirely. Not because they don't want connection, they want it deeply, but because the gap between wanting it and being able to reach it starts to feel too wide. They build a private world, rich and detailed and safe, where the rules make sense and nobody leaves without warning. And that world becomes so complete that the risk of the real one starts to seem genuinely not worth it. They stop going to the thing. They leave the group chat on mute. They tell themselves they prefer it this way. And maybe sometimes they do, but often underneath that preference is just a very old tiredness. The exhaustion of reaching and not quite arriving. Repeated enough times that stopping started to feel like wisdom. That's not peace. That's armor wearing the costume of peace. The distinction matters. Because feeling like an outsider is not the same as being someone who cannot belong. It just means the right context, the right people, the right kind of room hasn't shown up consistently enough yet. And most chronic outsiders, when they finally find that room, the first conversation where someone gets the reference, where nobody flinches at the thing you said, where you don't feel yourself performing a version of yourself, describe it as something close to shock, like discovering a word for something you thought was untranslatable, like realizing the problem was never the language, it was just the room. So if you've spent your life feeling like the outsider, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not broken, you are not defective, you are sensitive in a world that mistook sensitivity for weakness, perceptive in rooms that mistook observation for detachment, deep in a culture that often rewards surface. The outsider feeling was real. The conclusion you drew from it, that you were the problem, that part was never accurate. You weren't outside because you were less. You were outside because you were different. And different, in the long run, is not the consolation prize. It's the whole point. If this is the kind of psychology that makes you feel less alone, subscribe. And if you want to go deeper, the next video covers something that connects directly to this. Why the people who feel the most deeply are also the ones most likely to hide it completely. Click it. You'll understand why.